The courtroom was quiet except for the soft shuffle of papers and the faint tapping of shoes on the polished wooden floor. Sunlight streamed through the tall windows, casting long shadows on the walls, making the room feel both grand and intimidating. In one corner, a small boy sat on a plain chair, his legs dangling because they didn't quite reach the floor. His hands clutched a worn-out toy, a small plastic car that had clearly been his companion through many lonely nights. Beside him, a social worker sat patiently, occasionally giving him a reassuring nod or a gentle smile, trying to calm the storm of nerves that brewed quietly in his chest. The boy's eyes wandered around the courtroom, taking in the tall shelves filled with thick law books, the shiny gavel on the judge's desk, and the rows of benches where families, lawyers, and strangers came and went. He wasn't sure why he was here today, only that the air felt heavy, and people kept whispering about decisions and rules he couldn't fully understand. He had been to many places before, foster homes with different caregivers, some kind and some indifferent, and every time he had hoped he might stay, only to be told he had to move again. Today, something felt different, though he couldn't explain why. At the front of the room, the judge sat quietly, reviewing her papers. Her expression was serious, almost unapproachable, but there was a calm authority in the way she held herself. The boy had seen judges on television, but seeing one in real life was entirely different. The judge looked up occasionally, her eyes scanning the room, observing everyone with quiet precision. The boy's heart beat faster each time she looked in his direction, unsure whether she would notice him or only see the case. Files in front of her. The lawyers began preparing their documents, speaking in low tones, sometimes glancing toward the boy. Sometimes he caught phrases like custody and placement, words that sounded big and confusing. He didn't fully understand them, but he knew they were important and that today might change his life in ways he couldn't yet imagine. One lawyer adjusted his tie nervously, while another muttered under his breath, shuffling papers as if hoping the words themselves could influence the outcome. The boy watched quietly, feeling a strange mixture of fear, curiosity, and hope. Around him, the courtroom felt alive with tension. People whispered to each other, some shaking their heads, others nodding as if they already knew the story. The boy wondered if they were all talking about him. He felt small and invisible, yet he also felt a strange sense that today was different, as if something important was about to happen. The toy in his hands felt heavier than usual, a reminder that even in the middle of so many strangers and rules, he had a little piece of comfort that belonged only to him. The social worker leaned over and whispered softly, "You'll be okay, just stay calm and answer the questions." The boy nodded silently, trying to be brave, but a knot of nervousness twisted in his stomach. He had faced many challenges before, but nothing like this, sitting in a room full of adults whose voices carried authority, whose decisions could change the course of his life forever. He took a deep breath and tried to focus on the sound of his own heartbeat, slow and steady, pretending it was a drum that gave him courage. Then the judge looked up again, her eyes meeting his for a brief moment, and he felt a strange connection, something he couldn't name. It was as if she could see him, not just the case number of the file, but him, the little boy who had moved from home to home, hoping for someone to care, someone to call family, someone to truly belong to. For the first time in a long while, he felt a flicker of hope, a tiny spark that maybe today would be different. Maybe today something unexpected could happen, something that could change everything. The room began to quiet further as the court clerk announced the start of the session. Lawyers straightened in their seats, papers shuffled, and everyone waited for the proceedings to begin. The boy clutched his toy tighter, feeling a mix of fear and anticipation. His small heart beat faster, knowing that soon he would have to speak, that soon the moment that could change his life would arrive. And though he didn't know exactly what to expect, he could feel deep inside that today his life was on the edge of something important, something he had never experienced before, something that could finally make him feel seen. Even in the silence, the boy felt the weight of the courtroom, the gravity of every word that would be spoken. Yet, amid the fear, he felt a strange courage building quietly inside him, like a soft fire ready to grow. He didn't know what would happen or how people would react, but he knew that whatever came next, he would face it with all the hope he could muster, because today, in this big, serious courtroom, the story of his life was about to take a turn, and he could sense, even without understanding, that this moment would be unforgettable. The boy sat quietly in the courtroom, but his mind wandered far from the polished floors and the serious faces around him. He thought about the places he had called home, though none of them had ever felt truly like home. The foster houses, the temporary apartments, even the small, crowded apartments with kind strangers. They were all different, yet the same, never permanent, never safe enough to let him relax. Each time he had to leave, he carried the memories of a small room, a favorite chair, or a soft blanket, tucked carefully into his mind like precious treasures. He remembered his first foster home, a small apartment on the edge of town, where a lady with a warm smile had tried her best to take care of him. She had baked cookies and read him stories. And for a moment, he had felt a tiny spark of happiness, but it didn't last. And soon he had to move, leaving behind the smell of cookies, the pages of his favorite book, and the only person who had tried to make him feel safe. Each move had left a mark, a little hole in his heart that never fully healed. The boy's father had been absent, a name spoken only in hushed tones and whispers, and his mother had been gone even before he could remember, leaving behind questions he could never answer. Sometimes he wondered if she even thought about him, if she remembered him at all. Nights were the hardest, when the quiet pressed in and the emptiness felt heavier, and he clutched his small toy car, imagining it could take him anywhere, maybe even back to the love he had never truly known. Despite the loneliness, the boy had learned to be brave in his own way. He watched the adults carefully, learned their moods, and understood that words could hurt or protect. He had learned to stay quiet when it mattered, to smile when he needed to, and to hold on to hope, even when hope seemed impossible. And today, sitting in the courtroom, he felt that same mixture of fear and courage, a strange pull inside him that told him something important might happen, something that could finally change his story. The social worker beside him whispered softly, "You're going to meet someone important today." And though the words were meant to calm him, the boy's heart raced. He didn't know who it could be, a new caregiver, a judge, or maybe someone he'd been waiting for without realizing it. The anticipation made him fidget with his toy, tracing the small scratches and dents as if they held the secret to what was about to happen. Outside the courtroom, the boy had always felt small and overlooked, but here, in this serious room filled with authority and rules, he noticed something different, a quiet attention that seemed to notice him. He glanced at the judge, who moved with calm authority, her eyes scanning the papers, but occasionally lifting as if she could sense the boy's presence. A tiny spark of hope flickered inside him, a feeling he hadn't dared to feel in years. He remembered a picture he had drawn last night, of a woman smiling at him, holding his hand, and the words "my mom" written underneath. The drawing had been tucked carefully in his pocket, a secret he kept even from the social worker, but the image stayed alive in his mind, giving him courage and a question he couldn't shake. Could she be here today, someone who would finally see him as he really was, not just a case number or a child to be moved from place to place? As the lawyers whispered and the courtroom prepared for the session, the boy tried to focus on that feeling, on the spark of hope. He knew that life had been hard, unfair in so many ways, but somehow he believed that maybe, just maybe, something good could happen. That belief gave him a quiet strength, a feeling that he could face whatever came next, because despite all the moves, the empty rooms, and the missing love, he had survived. And surviving had made him stronger, more aware, more ready. And so he sat, small and tense, yet full of quiet courage, clutching his toy, imagining the woman from his drawing, wondering if she would be the one to finally fill the emptiness he had carried for so long. The courtroom felt heavy, the air filled with anticipation. But inside the boy, something new was stirring, a seed of hope that would soon grow into a moment no one in that room would ever forget. The courtroom grew even quieter as the session began. The boy sat up a little straighter in his chair, his small hands still clutching the worn toy car. His heart beat faster, not from fear alone, but from the strange feeling that something important was about to happen. Around him, the adults whispered to each other, flipping through thick folders, and the air was thick with tension. Each person seemed to be holding their breath, waiting for the first words to be spoken. The judge adjusted her robe and looked at the lawyers with a calm authority that demanded attention. The social worker leaned slightly toward the boy and whispered, "Just answer what you are asked, okay?" And he nodded silently. His mind raced with questions. What would they ask him? Would he say the wrong thing? Would they take him somewhere he didn't want to go? He had learned long ago that words could change everything. So he stayed quiet, watching and listening carefully. The lawyers began presenting their arguments, their voices low but firm, filled with legal words the boy didn't fully understand. Terms like custody, placement, and suitability floated in the air, heavy with meaning he could barely grasp. But he sensed that the words were about him, about his life, about decisions that could reshape everything he had ever known. The seriousness of it made him feel small, but it also stirred a strange determination in him, a feeling that he had to be seen and heard. Somewhere in the back of the courtroom, a woman shifted in her seat and glanced toward the boy. Noticing the way he fiddled with his toy, how his eyes flickered between the judge and the lawyers, it was as if he was silently trying to understand the rules of this strange world of adults. The boy didn't speak yet, but inside, he was preparing, gathering courage like a tiny flame that refused to go out. The judge spoke, her voice calm but firm, asking questions about the boy's life, his experiences, and what he wanted. Each question seemed simple to the adults, but to the boy they carried weight, as if every word he spoke could tip the balance of his future. He hesitated for a moment, thinking of all the moves, all the homes, all the nights he had cried himself to sleep hoping someone would notice him, hoping that this time, someone would truly see him. The social worker squeezed his shoulder gently, and he drew a shaky breath. He remembered the drawing he had made the night before, the woman smiling at him, the words "my mom," written carefully beneath her face. That memory gave him courage, a quiet confidence that maybe he could speak his truth, that maybe the right person, the one who could understand him, was here in this room, watching and waiting. The lawyers continued their arguments, one presenting evidence about the boy's past placements, another speaking about his emotional well-being. Each word seemed to push and pull on the boy's thoughts, reminding him of the loneliness he had felt, but also of the hope he carried quietly inside. The courtroom seemed to shrink around him, the murmurs fading into a distant hum as he focused on the small spark of bravery growing inside his chest. And then a question came directly to him, simple yet powerful. Asking what he wanted most, the boy's small body stiffened, his eyes widening slightly. He had never been asked this before, not in such a serious way, not where everyone was listening. The words felt heavy in his mouth, but he knew, deep down, that he couldn't lie. He couldn't say what the adults wanted to hear. He had to say what his heart knew. He looked at the judge for the first time directly, really looked, and something inside him shifted. He saw a calmness in her eyes, a patience, a kindness he had never expected in such a serious room. And in that moment, he made a choice that would change everything. He would speak the truth, not for the lawyers, not for the rules, but for himself, for the hope he had carried for so long. The courtroom seemed to hold its breath, waiting, and the boy felt the weight of the moment. But amid the tension, a quiet courage filled him, a small flame that had been lit through years of longing and resilience. He clutched his toy car one last time, took a steadying breath, and prepared to speak words that no one in that room would ever forget. The courtroom was silent, every eye fixed on the boy as the judge waited patiently for his answer. The boy felt his small hands tighten around the worn toy car, his heart pounding louder than the soft rustle of papers around him. For a moment, it felt as if the entire room had disappeared, leaving only him and the judge, a space filled with quiet tension and the weight of all the decisions that had been made about his life. He had practiced in his mind for days what he might say if asked who he wanted to be with, who he considered family. But the words that came now were not rehearsed, not carefully chosen to please anyone. They were his truth, raw and simple, carried from the depths of longing that had filled his childhood. He took a shaky breath, lifted his small head, and gazed directly at the judge, his eyes wide and shining with something the adults around him had rarely seen in a courtroom. Innocent courage. "You're my mom," he said softly, his voice clear enough for everyone to hear. The words hung in the air, delicate yet powerful, as if they had the weight of years of waiting and longing tucked into them. A sudden hush fell over the room, heavier than any silence before. The lawyers froze, pens paused mid-air, and the social worker beside him leaned back, stunned. The judge blinked, caught completely off guard, her eyebrows lifted slightly, her lips parting in a moment of disbelief. The courtroom seemed to hold its breath as she studied the boy, noticing for the first time the depth in his eyes, the small tremor in his voice, the unspoken hope that had carried him through countless moves and lonely nights. The murmurs of the audience began to rise, low whispers spreading like a ripple. But the boy didn't flinch. He didn't look away. He had said what he needed to say, and something inside him felt lighter, as if a small weight he had carried alone for years had finally lifted. The social worker pressed a hand to her mouth, her eyes wide, caught between surprise and emotion. She had seen many children speak, many plead, many cry, but she had never witnessed a moment quite like this, a young boy, standing emotionally vulnerable in a room filled with authority and judgment, declaring a simple truth that shattered the walls around him and softened the hearts inside. The lawyers exchanged hurried whispers, unsure how to proceed, their carefully prepared arguments suddenly seeming distant and irrelevant. The judge cleared her throat, trying to regain composure, but even her calm, measured voice carried an unusual softness as she addressed the boy. "Are you sure about that?" she asked gently, leaning slightly forward, and the boy nodded, his small head steady despite the pounding of his heart. The audience gasped, some quietly, some audibly, their faces reflecting shock, confusion, and a strange warmth, as if they had been reminded of something they had forgotten in the seriousness of life. The power of truth, of innocence, of words spoken from the heart. For a few moments, the courtroom was no longer a place of rules and papers. It was a space of raw human emotion, where a child's courage had pierced through the adult walls and touched everyone present. The boy felt a strange calm settle over him, his chest light despite the tension still buzzing in the room. He had spoken. He had taken a step that no one expected, and in that step he had claimed a small piece of power over his own story. For years, decisions had been made for him, homes chosen without his voice, lives rearranged around him. But now, in these simple words, he had made himself seen, made his heart understood. The judge's eyes softened, and for the first time, she seemed to see the boy not as a case file or a legal matter, but as a child who had carried hope and courage far beyond his years. The courtroom remained silent, the weight of the moment pressing gently on everyone present, as if the universe itself had paused to honor the honesty of a small boy who dared to speak his truth. And in that pause, everything shifted, the air changed, and a new story began, one where love, hope, and understanding could finally find a place. The courtroom seemed frozen for a moment, as if time itself had paused to take in the boy's words. "You're my mom," whispered into the air with all the innocence and courage of a child who had known too much loss. The adults around him shifted uneasily, unsure how to respond to something so unexpected, so raw, so impossible to ignore. A low murmur began among the spectators, but it wasn't the usual chatter of a court hearing. It was a ripple of shock, awe, and something softer, almost like wonder. The judge leaned back slightly, her hands resting on the bench, her face betraying a mixture of surprise and something more profound, perhaps recognition, perhaps empathy, as she looked at the boy, really looked at him, seeing the small trembling in his hands, the wide, hopeful eyes, the quiet courage that had brought him to this moment. Even the lawyers, trained to argue and persuade, paused, their carefully rehearsed words lost somewhere between disbelief and the weight of what had just been said. Whispers spread quickly, low at first, then louder. The audience of strangers, family members, and reporters who had been observing the case with clinical detachment now found themselves touched, some covering their mouths, others shaking their heads in amazement. It was the kind of moment that made people forget the rules, forget the legal jargon, and simply witness humanity, raw and unfiltered. The social worker, sitting close to the boy, felt a sudden lump in her throat. She had always tried to protect him, to guide him through the difficult maze of foster care. But she had never imagined a moment like this, when the boy's voice, small yet powerful, could command the attention of everyone in the room. It was a reminder of the strength and depth that children often carried silently, hidden behind timid eyes and quiet smiles. One of the lawyers whispered to a colleague, "I didn't see that coming." And for the first time, the argument about placements and custody seemed secondary. The words had shifted the focus, turning the case from a legal matter into a human story, a story about love, hope, and connection. The courtroom, filled with people accustomed to authority and procedure, now experienced something unpredictable, something that touched hearts rather than papers. The judge cleared her throat, breaking the spell, but the softness in her voice lingered. "That's very brave of you to say," she said gently. "Tell me more about what you mean." The boy, encouraged by the gentle tone, took a small breath and began to explain his own words, speaking about the feeling of safety, the kindness he had glimpsed, and the longing he had carried for someone to truly see him. His words were simple, unpolished, yet full of honesty, and each sentence seemed to ripple through the courtroom, touching everyone in a way that facts and evidence never could. People in the courtroom shifted in their seats, their expressions softening, their minds, so focused on rules and outcomes, now filled with empathy and understanding. It was as if the boy had reminded them of something they had forgotten: the power of truth, the innocence of a child, and the unexpected ways love could appear. The social worker wiped away a quiet tear, and even the stoic lawyers felt a strange warmth in their chests. The boy's words had created a ripple effect, not just in the courtroom, but in the hearts of everyone present. People who had entered with opinions and judgments found themselves reconsidering, seeing the case through the boy's eyes. The room, once heavy with tension, now felt lighter, filled with a sense of hope, possibility, and humanity. The boy, though small and nervous, had altered the course of the day, had shifted the focus from law and procedure to compassion and understanding. Even after a moment of stunned silence, the audience could not stop talking quietly. The murmurs were filled with awe, disbelief, and admiration, and the energy in the room had changed completely. No longer was it just a courtroom. It had become a space of empathy, a place where a child's words could move hearts, inspire change, and remind everyone present that sometimes the simplest truth could be the most powerful. The boy sat quietly again, feeling a mix of relief and hope. His small act of bravery had created something bigger than he had imagined. It was more than a statement. It was a bridge between loneliness and understanding, fear and acceptance, uncertainty and love. And though he didn't know how everything would unfold, he sensed at this moment, this truth spoken so simply had changed everything in a way that would stay with the courtroom, and with him forever. The judge leaned forward slightly, her hands resting gently on the edge of the bench, her eyes never leaving the boy. There was a softness there now, a warmth that had not been present at the start of the hearing. The courtroom seemed to hush even more, as if everyone could sense that something extraordinary was unfolding. The words the boy had spoken hung in the air, still powerful, still fragile, carrying years of longing and courage. "Why do you feel that way?" the judge asked gently, her voice calm but full of curiosity. The boy's small chest rose and fell quickly as he tried to find the words. He looked at her, really looked at her, and saw no anger, no judgment, only attention and care. Something inside him shifted, a tiny flame of trust flickering to life, something he hadn't felt in a long time. Someone seeing him, truly seeing him. I don't know exactly," he said softly, his words hesitant but honest. When I'm with you, it feels like home, like someone finally cares, like I can breathe." His voice trembled slightly, but the truth in it was undeniable, raw, and simple. The courtroom seemed to hold its breath, listening not to legal arguments or evidence, but to the beating heart of a small boy who had spent too long in silence. The judge's face softened even more, a small, almost imperceptible smile touching her lips. Her eyes glistened as she spoke. "It's very brave to say what you feel, and it takes a lot of courage to speak your heart in front of so many people." She paused for a moment, letting the words sink in. Not just for the boy, but for everyone in the room. Even the lawyers and court staff seemed to lean in, caught in the quiet intensity of the moment. The boy's social worker reached over and squeezed his hand gently. Giving him a reassuring nod, he took a deep breath and felt some of the tension that had gripped him for years begin to ease. He realized that for the first time in a long time, someone was listening. Not just listening to his words, but to the feelings behind them. The judge's eyes met his again, and in them he saw understanding, patience, and an unexpected compassion. The judge continued, her voice calm and kind. Sometimes families are not just about who gives birth or who takes care legally, but about who sees you, who protects you, and who loves you. She looked around the courtroom briefly, then back at the boy. You are a brave, wonderful boy, and it's clear that your heart knows what it needs. The boy felt a warmth spreading in his chest, something he hadn't felt in years, a sense of being seen, being acknowledged, and being understood. Whispers ran quietly through the courtroom, but this time they carried, all rather than surprise, the adults present were witnessing a rare, unspoken miracle, a child being validated, respected, and cherished for his honesty. The judge's words had not only reassured the boy, but had shifted the entire atmosphere, replacing tension with a quiet sense of hope and possibility. The boy looked down at his hands, then back at the judge, and for the first time, he felt courage swell in a way he hadn't felt before. I want someone to love me and care for me, he said softly, almost to himself. I've been waiting a long time, and I think that could be you. The courtroom seemed to pause once again, the weight of his honesty pressing gently on every heart present. The judge's expression softened further, and she nodded slowly. Thank you for sharing that with me, she said, her voice gentle but full of warmth. I promise I will do everything I can to make sure you are safe, cared for, and loved. You deserve that more than anything, and I want to help you find it. The boy felt tears prick the corners of his eyes, but they weren't tears of sadness. They were tears of hope, a release of years of longing. For a moment, the courtroom was quiet, everyone lost in the power of that simple connection. A small boy had spoken his truth, and an adult, a figure of authority, had responded with empathy, care, and a promise. The energy in the room shifted completely, tension replaced by something profound and human, something rare and beautiful. The boy's small heart felt lighter, and in that moment he finally believed that maybe, just maybe, life could be different, brighter, filled with love he had never dared to imagine. The boy sat quietly for a moment, feeling a strange calm he hadn't known before. The judge's words echoed in his mind, soft but powerful, like a promise that someone would finally see him, care for him, and help him feel safe. He had spent so many years moving from home to home, wondering if anyone would ever truly understand him, and now, for the first time, it felt like the answer was here, right in front of him. The judge leaned forward slightly and spoke again, her voice gentle. We will work together to find what's best for you, not just what's legal, but what will make your heart feel at home. The boy nodded slowly, trying to take it all in, realizing that the world could indeed change with just a few words, a few moments of honesty. He had given his truth, and now someone in authority had promised to honor it. Across the courtroom, the adults who had been tense and serious moments ago now showed subtle smiles, their eyes softening as they watched the boy. The social worker let out a quiet sigh, relief evident in her expression. She had always hoped for this day, the day when a child's voice would not be ignored, the day when a simple declaration of truth could spark real change. The lawyers returned to their notes, but their demeanor had shifted as well. The arguments about custody and placement no longer seemed cold or impersonal. Instead, they understood that this was about a child, about life, about hope, and that every decision would carry weight beyond legal terms. It was a moment that reminded everyone that the law, while important, could never replace empathy, compassion, and understanding. The boy glanced down at his hands, then back at the judge, and for the first time he felt brave, not scared, not small, but truly brave. He realized that courage didn't always roar. It sometimes whispered, small but steady, like the voice of a child speaking his heart in a courtroom full of strangers. He smiled slightly, a small, shy smile, feeling a sense of pride and relief he hadn't known he could feel. The judge spoke again, softer this time, almost to herself, but loud enough for the boy to hear. "You have reminded all of us here what is truly important." The boy's heart swelled at the words, understanding somehow that he had made a difference, not just for himself, but for everyone witnessing this moment. His words had shifted the mood, the room, and perhaps even the lives of those present. As the courtroom slowly returned to normal, the air felt lighter, filled with a quiet energy of hope. The boy's social worker leaned closer, whispering encouragement and praise, and he felt the warmth of connection he had longed for. She held his hand as they walked slowly toward the exit, and he realized that this was the first step toward something new, something permanent, something that could truly be called home. Outside the courtroom, sunlight streamed in through the doors, warm and bright, and the boy paused for a moment to breathe deeply, feeling the weight of the past lifting slightly from his shoulders. He thought of all the times he had felt unseen, unwanted, and afraid. And for the first time, he believed that life could be different, filled with love, care, and understanding. The boy knew the journey wasn't over, but he also knew that this moment, the courage to speak his truth, the judge's empathy, the ripple of care, would stay with him forever, guiding him toward a future he had once only dreamed of. The courtroom, now returning to its usual rhythm, had been transformed, if only for a short while, by a small boy's bravery. The adults present would carry the memory of this day, remembering how simple words spoken from the heart could change hearts, challenge perspectives, and bring hope where there had been uncertainty. The boy's life, fragile and uncertain moments ago, had found a new thread of promise, a chance for love and family that could finally feel real. As the boy stepped outside, hand in hand with the social worker, he felt lighter, braver, and stronger. The journey ahead was still uncertain, but now, for the first time in a long time, he believed that family wasn't just about rules, documents, or laws, but about connection, care, and the courage to speak your truth. And in that belief, he found the strength to hope again, to dream again, and to believe that sometimes one small moment of honesty can change everything. The boy walked slowly out of the courtroom, holding tightly to the social worker's hand. Yet he felt a strange lightness in his chest, like a weight he had carried for years had finally been lifted. He looked up at the sunlight streaming through the doors, the warmth touching his face. And for the first time in a long time, he allowed himself to imagine a life where he could truly belong. Not just move from home to home, but a place where someone would care for him, see him, and love him for who he was. The courtroom behind him seemed distant now, but its impact lingered, etched into his heart. The faces of the adults, once intimidating and serious, had softened, and their quiet reactions had reminded him that people could change, that understanding and empathy were possible even in the most unlikely places. He thought of the judge, her calm eyes and gentle words, and felt a strange gratitude, not only for what she could do for him, but for the way she had truly seen him, a small boy with a big heart and years of untold stories. He remembered every step of the journey that had led him here, the nights of loneliness, the empty rooms, the whispered words of strangers who tried to care but couldn't fill the void, the countless times he had hoped, prayed silently, or drawn pictures of a mother who might love him. And now, for the first time, those hopes felt real, tangible, not just dreams tucked into the corners of his mind. The social worker squeezed his hand gently, and he realized she had been there through it all, guiding him, protecting him, but never replacing what he truly wanted, a real connection, a family, someone to call his own. Her eyes reflected pride and relief, and the boy felt a quiet bond, knowing that even as he moved forward, she would be there to support him, to help him navigate the new chapter of his life. As they walked toward the car, he glanced back at the courthouse, remembering the gasps, the whispers, and the faces that had softened in awe of his honesty. He understood that something had shifted that day, not just for him, but for everyone who witnessed his courage. It was a reminder that truth and bravery, even from the smallest voice, could ripple out and touch hearts in ways no one expected. The boy thought again about the drawing he had hidden in his pocket, the woman smiling at him, The words "my mom" written beneath her face, he pulled it out carefully and looked at it. And for the first time, he believed it could become real. The court had listened, the judge had understood, and the world, at least this small corner of it, had opened just a little wider for him, letting hope in. He realized that family was not always about perfect circumstances, papers, or titles, but about love, care, and courage, the bravery to speak, the willingness to listen, and the choice to protect someone's heart were what made a family. And today he had learned that the world could still surprise him with kindness, even in the most serious, structured, and intimidating places. The boy took a deep breath, feeling the sun on his face, and smiled. A small, shy smile that held so much promise. He knew the journey ahead would still have challenges, adjustments, and new beginnings. But he also knew that his voice mattered, that his heart could be heard, and that his truth could bring change, not just for him, but for everyone around him. As the car drove away from the courthouse, the boy looked out the window, thinking of the future, imagining the people who would care for him, the moments of laughter and safety he had dreamed about for so long. And for the first time, he didn't feel fear, only hope, only the quiet, powerful certainty that life could be different, that love could be found, and that sometimes all it took was one small voice, brave enough to speak the truth, to make a difference, to change everything. And in that feeling, in the sunlight and the warmth, he finally believed that family, love, and belonging were not just dreams. They were waiting for him just around the corner.